No hesitation, one of the great memories of all time.
Hi class, today we'll be talking about memory. My dad told me a story. We went on a family vacation and we went all the way out to Colorado, which was really far. I had never been that far away on a vacation. It was really intense and awesome. It's in the Mesa Verde, the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde in the southwestern part of Colorado. And I was a young man at the time, maybe 8, very young man. We had a wonderful time climbing all around these cliff dwellings. The natives carved out whole cities in the side of cliffs. And we got to climb these big wooden log ladders, and we got to go around and see their dwelling places and their gathering places in the side of cliffs. It's really amazing. So we went out, we did that, and we got back to the hotel that night, and my dad called up his parents and he said, "I'm so thankful for you guys taking me to see this, because now I've gotten to take my boys to see it and we had a wonderful time. Thank you for taking me when I was a boy to the Mesa Verde cliff dwellings." And his parents said, "You never went there, but you had a book about it. And our family before you were born went there. We drove in a car all the way out to Colorado from San Diego. We were there, we have family pictures of it. You've never been there." You see, memory's tricky. I love that story because I've just told you a story that my dad had taken me to Mesa Verde when I was a boy. Crux of the story is that that didn't happen. Although he believed it so much, he planned a trip for us to go all the way out to Colorado. Now, I'm glad that his memory was bad and that we got to go take that trip. But he behaved as if he believed that. When you think of a memory, a false memory like that, it really affected him enough to take up his 2 boys and his wife and head off to Colorado on a faulty belief, on a memory that wasn't real. That's not something that is uncommon for people to have happen to them when they realize that something that they remembered one way isn't exactly so. Why is it? Why are memories not a strict recording? Like, I'm recording this on a video. Why isn't it just a recording? Why isn't my brain recording every little thing that I'm experiencing from my sensory neurons? Why isn't my brain storing all of that? And why don't I have access to remembering everything that I studied? That is the mystery of memory, and that's what we're going to explore. The book talks about 3 things that the memory system of humans is capable of doing. One of them is encoding, the other one is storage, and the third one is retrieval. If there's a problem with any of these 3 systems, then people might think that they have a memory problem, or they might have a memory problem. But they could be vastly different issues for those particular people. When we say encoding, what we really mean is the memory system's learning ability. Encoding means that you're taking something that was experienced by you, or a thought that you had, and you're turning it into a language that your brain can store. Storage is something that your brain does through neural networking, through bringing together disparate ideas. And retrieval is when you want to bring back information that you've previously learned. Yes?
I have a tick in the back of my head.
Alright. My son has a tick in the back of his head. Let's see. Alright. And there's a tick there. Look at that.
You want to see it?
There was a tick there. Here, let's see if we can.
Ow.
Can't zoom in on
Here
that.
for a while.
Nah, it's not big. Look,
Tiny little
tick.
Tiny little.
All right, bye-bye, Mr. Tick. All right, I'm back. That's what you get when you work from home. But I was talking about encoding. Encoding is learning. Storage is how we keep things in our memory, how we create systems to remember things. And retrieval is how we bring back memories that we've learned. And so these are the 3 parts of memory that we're going to cover today. Some of the first people to talk about the memory system in this compartmentalized way was 2 researchers, Atkinson and Shiffrin. Atkinson actually signed my diploma from UC Irvine. He became later the president of the UC Regents, and so that's kind of cool. But he was a memory researcher. They proposed a model of memory that had different modes for memory. One would be sensory memory. Again, sensory memory is just anything that happens to your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your body kinesthetic, your tongue, all the 5 senses. That's sensory memory. It's very short, right? And you're bombarded with input all the time. Most of that we don't do anything with. So I don't remember what my knee felt like 5 seconds ago because I wasn't paying attention to it. So attention is something that allows for these sensory memories to come into short-term memory. Short-term memory gives us a little bit of time to think about something, to manipulate it, to get it ready to be stored into long-term memory. If we elaborate on something that happens in our short-term memory, then we can make it stick there longer. Do you remember what I said my son's name was who had a tick in his head? You might be thinking to yourself, well, you only said it once. Okay, we can rewind the tape and look. If you had done something with that, right, it was sensory memory, I said my son's name, he had something going on. What he had going on was a tick. See, ticks people tend to think of as a little bit dangerous. You don't tend to think of a little kid's name as something that's terribly important, but a tick, oh, there's ticks around here, I should be careful, right? Because ticks carry Lyme disease. So your brain, associating all those things, pulls in information about ticks and goes, that's dangerous, and then starts concentrating on the tick rather than his name. But if the quiz was about his name right now, you'd be stumped because you go, I don't remember. Maybe you do remember. Maybe you remember because you have someone who has that same name and they're your friend. Or perhaps it shocked you that my son's name was that. I don't know. For whatever reason, you may have elaborated on that particular experience. And when you elaborate on something, that means that you think of more things that relate to it or are associated with it. And if you've done that, if you've thought about something in an elaborative way, that storage that's happening is going into long-term memory. And that's the last of these modal models of memory in Atkinson and Shiffrin's model. Enables you to retrieve it more easily because it's connected to many different things. Now, there's some problems with it. One of the problems is it doesn't necessarily account for what we do in short-term memory. Short-term memory, also, a lot of people think, oh, I have problems with short-term memory because I forgot where I parked my car. That's not a short-term memory problem. That's a retrieval problem. You have difficulty retrieving from long-term memory where your car was parked. And that's probably because, again, just like with the tick, you were distracted by other things that you thought were more important. When we concentrate on something and when we put a lot of attention onto it, we can store and retrieve information readily. A man by the name of Alan Baddeley came along after Atkinson and Shiffrin, and he began to work on sort of the system that is that sort of playing around with that information mode. What we called short-term memory, what Atkinson and Shiffrin called it, Alan Baddeley termed it working memory. Now, working memory is a cool thing because it really says, look, this is where you can work on memory. This is where you can adjust it, relate things to it, associate things to it, and then hopefully store it adequately so that you can retrieve it later on. And that working memory had 3 different components. And the 3 components that he talked about, I think the book says 4. The 3 I'm going to talk about are the central executor. The central executor, for lack of a better term, is what directs your attention, right? So now I'm focusing on teaching, right? But if I was going to shift my attention to maybe I feel a tick on my leg or something, that is how I'm going to do it. Is in my short-term memory, I'm going to be going on lecture, but then I can switch over. And the central executor is what allows us in our working memory to shift from one aspect to the next. Working memory has 2 elements to it that are separate from the central executor, but they both kind of do the same thing. And what that is, that it's almost like your sensory DVR. It's almost like you can go back and replay something. If I were to say flash up a symbol here on the screen, you know, maybe like right there. I'll see if I can do that later in post edit. If I were to flash up a symbol and your brain didn't have enough time to memorize every part of it, what it would do is it would sort of attempt to reconstruct it in your mind if you saw it up here. You probably wouldn't get all the details of it, but you could be pretty good at that. If I said, okay, now I want you to draw that thing that was up here, you might look down at it and start drawing and think, I got most of that. That's called your visual spatial sketch pad. What that means is that your brain holds memory for visual things as though they're a construct, as though it's like, if you think of RAM on a computer, that's one of the analogies that's been used for this, is the random access memory. How much processing can you do is limited in working memory, right? I can't show you a map of Venice, Italy, and have you memorize every single canal and street in a short period of time, but there are people that know that. it takes them long periods of time, lots of attention, lots of study, lots of practice for it. But if I just flash it up to you, you'd have a gist of it. You would get a general sense of what it looked like if I had a map of Venice, Italy, right there. I don't, unless I, again, in post-edit, go in and fill it in if I'm nice to you.
But you can imagine what it'd be like if they did, right? Huh?
And finally, the last one, it's called your phonological loop. Phonological loop is something that is like the visual spatial sketchpad, but the phonological loop is your brain's ability, your cognitive ability, to listen to what someone's saying, and without even knowing it, auditorily, from your sense of hearing, you would be able to repeat that thing. Auditorily, from your sense of hearing, you would be able to repeat that thing. You don't have to repeat this if you're watching this where there's a bunch of people. You don't have to say it out loud, but try and say it in your head, okay? I'll say something and then I'll stop. He swam across the lake. Hopefully you just said, he swam across the lake. That one's easy. You get what I'm doing now. I'm saying something, and then when I pause, you're to say the same thing. And this is exploring our phonological loop, or your working memory's ability to hear something that's said to you, to store it for a short period of time, and then to utilize it to recreate it, okay? The winding road led to the village. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you can do those three, well then, sounds like you have a intact arcuate fasciculus. But what if I said something in another language? No hay niños desatendidos. ¿Dónde está mi perro? What if I said something in a language you had no familiarity with? Could you do that? If I say something in Spanish, perhaps you're confident that you could repeat it because, well, it has repeatability. You've heard it before. What that means is that you have had exposure to Spanish before, and so your brain can retrieve back those information. But what if I said, Che bili bili ba? Now, would you be able to repeat that correctly? It depends. You probably haven't heard West African Fulani language before. It's probably not something that you've heard. Yet, you were able to repeat that, or at least attempt it pretty accurately in your mind. This ability of our phonological loop to do that enables us, it's so much power in learning. Kids will mimic people when they're young. They'll mimic them as they're learning language, and they're using their ability of their phonological loop to do it. They don't know what it means when we say things, but they will repeat after us. And that helps them to sort of get the context with which we're using these symbolic representations of our world through speech, but they need that phonological loop. So badly with the central executor, phonological loop, and visual spatial sketchpad. I want to talk to you about forgetting. We started this topic by telling you about a story about my dad that was a false memory. But what about memories that are real and you forget them? You think you remembered something, you know, the combination to a lock that you normally use. You think you know it because you have confidence you've done it before, but what about forgetting? Let's say I gave you a lock, and the lock's combination was E, O, S, C. So it was a 4-letter combination. Now you turn the first one to E, the second one to O, the next one to S, and the next one to C. You open it up, it opens. You go and do whatever you need to do. Do you think you'll remember that later? Well, that depends. A man by the name of Ebbinghaus studied this by making up nonsense words. E-O-S-C, Yosk. It's a made-up word. I just made it up right there. Ebbinghaus did a really cool thing. He made up tons of nonsense words. Ebbinghaus is German, and so he made them up in German. But there's something you should know. You could make up words that follow the correct orthographic representation of the letter and don't violate any of the grammatical ways that we combine letters. If you put P-X-H-I, that doesn't mean anything. It violates some real fundamental rules that you wouldn't know how to say in English. But if you said something like F-L-U-N, floon. Floon doesn't mean anything. It's not a word, F-L-U-N. But it doesn't violate any of our properties of English, how to combine words. So he made up a bunch of those. Tons and tons of these nonsense words. They didn't mean anything in German. He used himself as the test subject. What he did was he memorized, he broke all those words up. He made them all up and he broke them up into lists. Let's say a list of 30 words. What he'd do is he'd sit there until he memorized all 30 words in a row. The moment he got all 30 words correct, after he had memorized it, he put the list down, closed it, and then went over and said, okay, I'm gonna wait. I don't know, the first time he said, maybe I'll wait a minute. And then after a minute, bell rings, he set an alarm on Siri or Alexa or something. And he went back and tried to memorize and tried to recreate that list. That list that he had put away after he memorized it 100%. After about a minute, he lost a substantial amount of those words. Again, nonsense words. They weren't like dog, cat, ball, kayak, orange, wind, sail. They weren't words that he knew. They were nonsense words. So it wasn't like he could particularly have some sort of relationship to them. I'm looking at a wind sail and a kayak and a ball. So those are easy for me to relate to, and I would remember them easily because they're in my environment. I've
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
elaborated on them already. These were not like that. These nonsense words he couldn't elaborate on. He couldn't erase. He couldn't attach them with an association to something I already knew because they were nonsense. After a minute, he forgot a bunch. Then he recorded the percentage he got and plotted it on an X and a Y axis. Now the X axis that comes across the horizontal, that was time, right? So near the 0, 1 minute is just a little bit. And then at the 0 for the Y going up is 0 correct, and percentage correct, and then all the way at the top would be 100% correct. So all the time he started with 100% correct at time 1, but at time 2 he plotted how much of that list that he remembered. So after he did the 1 minute one, he said, okay, I'll memorize another 30 nonsense words. And he did, and when he got 100%, he put that list away, put it away in his book, so it's away from him. After 5 minutes, and he went back and he tried to remember as many of those words as he could. As he goes back and remembers after 5 minutes, there was a substantial loss of memory. So he forgot from 0 to 5 minutes, he forgot a lot of the list. More than he forgot after 1 minute. And then he would do another version of that. Memorize a list of 30 words and then wait 10 minutes. Memorize a list of words and wait 30 minutes. Memorize a list of words and wait an hour. Memorize the list of words and wait 24 hours. And what's amazing is that he found that forgetting happens rapidly. But then, after 30 minutes to an hour, there's almost no difference in the amount of lost information from that list. Then he went like, well, what about a week? And he tested himself after. What about a month? And he tests himself after a month. You see, what he had an hour after memorizing that list, there was almost no change between the hour after he memorized that list and like a year later. If you've got it, you've got it. You lose a substantial amount immediately, but that amount that you retain, you keep not forgetting that for a very, very long time. What will you remember about this lecture? I'm guessing, based on Ebbinghouse's research, you're going to forget most of it. Now, what do you do about that, right? If you know you're going to forget most of this lecture, well, thankfully, in the digital age, you can just rewatch the lecture. You could go read the book. But really importantly, recognize that he was memorizing nonsense words. He didn't have any of his normal brain's ability to relate it to things that he himself connected with, that he himself already knew, to build upon what he already knew. All right, I'm going to tell you 3 things. 1, the Golden Gate Bridge, it gets painted year-round. Year-round. So they start at one end, paint, and it takes them a long time. By the time they get to the other side, to keep it that enigmatic international orange or something like that. I think international orange. But they paint it year-round. By the time they get to this end, to keep it that same color, because all that fog in San Francisco, all the sort of salty air, it deteriorates the paint. They got to go back to the other side and repaint it again. So they stay painting all year long. The next one, island in the South Pacific, is actually tilted up because of volcanic activity. So it tilted it. But the trees that come out the top, they grew and then they got tilted, so they come out at an angle. And finally, the wind on the North Pole rotates counterclockwise. So if you look at the globe up at the top, it's rotating counterclockwise. That's how wind goes. If you wanted to know about weather, you could just look at that. The wind goes that way and then follow it down around the globe.